You must face judgment.
Poor child. She deserves this.
Let her suffer.
My friend didn't do it, please! I didn't steal it, believe me.
Shut up, thief!
My friend didn't do it, please. Please.
The guards grabbed Clara by both arms and dragged her through the village. People shouted. Some cursed. Others threw sand at her face. Thief! Someone screamed. She stole from the king. Clara struggled, crying, shaking her head desperately. I didn't take it. I swear I didn't. But nobody listened. Standing in the crowd, crying louder than anyone else, was the one person Clara trusted more than her own shadow, Mara, her best friend. The same woman who had secretly destroyed her life. And before this day ended, the entire village would discover a truth far darker than simple theft. But to understand how everything went so wrong, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to the quiet village where Clara once believed she was safe. But before we start, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss the shocking truth in this story. Clara had never known an easy life. Her father died when she was only 10 years old. After his death, the responsibility of the entire family slowly fell on her small shoulders. Her mother became sick not long after. The illness drained her strength day by day. Some mornings, she couldn't even stand up. Clara's younger siblings depended on her for everything: food, clothes, hope. Every morning before the sun rose, Clara would wake up quietly, fetch water from the river, prepare food for her siblings, and then rush to the farm to work. By evening, she returned exhausted, but she still found the energy to care for her sick mother. People in the village often whispered the same thing about her. That girl has the heart of 10 people. But Clara never saw herself as strong. She was simply trying to survive, trying to keep her family alive. And in the middle of all this struggle, there was one person who always stood beside her. Mara. Mara and Clara had grown up together. They were almost the same age. They played together as children, worked together as teenagers. Even when they were apart, people expected to see them together again soon. Mara was known in the village for being lively and talkative. She always knew the latest gossip, always had something exciting to say. While Clara was quiet and hardworking, Mara was bold and charming. Some villagers even joked that the two girls were like fire and water, different but inseparable. Whenever Clara felt overwhelmed by life, Mara was the one who made her laugh again. Whenever Mara needed help, Clara was the first person to show up. They shared secrets, dreams, even food when there wasn't enough. Clara believed with all her heart that Mara would always protect her. And maybe, at some point in the past, that was true. But something had changed. Something dark had begun growing inside Mara. Jealousy. It started small, almost invisible, but slowly it became something much dangerous. One evening, while Clara was washing clothes outside her small house, Mara suddenly appeared, running toward her with excitement. "Clara," she called, "you won't believe what I just heard." Clara looked up curiously. What happened? Mara sat down beside her, lowering her voice like someone about to share a secret. "The king in the neighboring village is looking for young maidens to work in the palace." Clara blinked. "The palace?" Mara nodded eagerly. "They are paying more money than anyone earns here." Clara paused. Her mind immediately drifted to her mother lying weakly inside the hut. Medicine cost money. Food cost money. Even simple herbs from the healer required payment. Money like that could change everything. Mara watched Clara's reaction carefully. Then she smiled and said something that would change their lives forever. "We should go together." At that moment, Clara felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. If she could earn palace wages, she could finally give her family a better life, maybe even cure her mother. After thinking about it for 2 nights, Clara agreed. A few days later, the two girls packed their small belongings and left the village. Clara hugged her siblings tightly. Her mother held her hand weakly. "Come back safe," the woman whispered. Clara promised she would. She had no idea that when she returned, everything would be different. The journey to the neighboring kingdom took nearly a full day on foot. When they finally reached the palace gates, Clara was speechless. The walls were enormous. Guards stood watching shining armor. Servants moved quickly in and out carrying baskets and trays. The palace was a world completely different from their quiet village. After being registered with other workers, Clara and Mara were assigned to the palace servants. Their duties were simple but demanding: cleaning royal chambers, fetching water, preparing baths, carrying messages. The first few weeks were exhausting, but Clara didn't complain. She worked harder than anyone else. She cleaned every room carefully. She helped older servants without being asked. Her kindness quickly earned the respect of many people in the palace. Even the chief housekeeper noticed her dedication. But someone else had begun noticing her too: the prince. The first time the prince spoke to Clara, she nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. He had walked into the corridor unexpectedly. She quickly bowed her head. "Forgive me, my prince." But instead of walking away, he smiled. "You're new here, aren't you?" Clara nodded nervously. "Yes, my prince." "Where are you from?" She told him about her village, about her family, about her sick mother. The prince listened quietly. Before leaving, he said something simple: "You work very hard." For Clara, it was just a polite moment, but for Mara, it was the beginning of something she could not accept. From that day on, the prince seemed to find excuses to pass through Clara's work area. Sometimes he asked questions, sometimes he simply watched her work. Clara never thought much about it, but Mara noticed every glance, every smile, every moment. At first, she tried to ignore it, but jealousy is like poison. The more it sits inside the heart, the stronger it becomes. Soon, Mara's thoughts began changing. Why Clara? Why not her? She believed she was prettier, more interesting, more confident, yet the prince barely looked at her. Instead, he seemed fascinated by the quiet girl from the village. Each time Clara spoke about sending money home to help her family, the prince's respect for her grew stronger. And each time that happened, Mara's resentment grew deeper. Until one night, she made a decision. If Clara disappeared, everything would change. And the first step of her plan began on a dark evening outside the palace. Clara had finished her duties late that night. The moonlight barely lit the narrow path leading to the servants' quarters. As she walked quietly, several shadows suddenly moved in front of her. 3 boys stepped out of the darkness. Clara froze. "What do you want?" They didn't answer. Instead, they moved closer. Clara's heart began pounding violently. Before she could run, one of them grabbed her arm. She screamed, but the road was empty. What Clara didn't know was that these boys had been paid by someone she trusted completely. And just when the situation began turning terrifying, something unexpected happened. An arrow suddenly struck the ground beside them. The boys jumped back in shock. A voice came from the darkness. "Leave her." A young hunter stepped out from the trees holding a bow. His presence alone was enough. The boys ran, disappearing into the night. The hunter helped Clara stand. "You shouldn't walk this road alone," he said gently. Clara thanked him repeatedly before rushing back toward the palace. When she arrived at the servants' quarters, the other maids gathered around her in concern. But the person who ran to her first was Mara. "Oh, Clara," she cried dramatically. "Who did this to you?" Clara hugged her friend tightly, still shaking, still terrified. She never noticed the brief flash of anger that crossed Mara's eyes, because the plan had failed, and Mara was already thinking of something worse, something far more dangerous, something that would finally destroy Clara forever. But the next thing Mara would do would not only destroy Clara, it would destroy an entire family. And the prince himself would soon begin to suspect that something in the palace was terribly wrong. Clara tried to return to her normal life after the night of the attack, but something inside her had changed. For the first time since arriving at the palace, she felt a quiet fear whenever she walked alone. She didn't understand why anyone would want to harm her. She had never offended anyone. She kept asking herself the same question: who would do such a thing? But whenever that question appeared in her mind, she quickly pushed it away, because the answer she would eventually discover was something she could never imagine. Meanwhile, Mara was furious. The plan she arranged had failed miserably. The boy she paid had run away the moment the hunter appeared. Clara was still alive, still working, still receiving attention from the prince. Each passing day only made Mara's jealousy worse. She began watching Clara carefully, studying her movements, waiting for another opportunity. And that opportunity arrived one hot afternoon. That day, several palace maids were sent to assist workers at the royal farm just outside the palace walls. The farm stretched across a wide field filled with tall grasses and crops. The sun was blazing above them as the maids harvested vegetables and cleared weeds. Clara walked quietly beside Mara. Neither of them spoke much, but Mara's eyes were constantly scanning the ground around them. Then suddenly, she saw something. Hidden in the grass was a large snake slowly moving through the field. Its body was thick, its scales glimmered under the sunlight, and it was heading directly toward Clara. In that moment, Mara saw the perfect opportunity. Instead of warning Clara immediately, she stepped backwards slowly. She allowed Clara to move closer to the snake without realizing the danger. Then suddenly, Mara screamed loudly, "Snake!" Clara turned instantly, but the moment she saw the snake, Mara had already run, leaving her behind. The snake lifted its head and hissed. For a second, Clara froze. Her heart slammed against her chest. Then instinct took over. She jumped backwards just as the snake lunged forward. The creature struck the empty ground where her leg had been. Clara stumbled and scrambled away across the grass. Workers nearby rushed toward her with sticks. The snake eventually slithered away into the bushes. Clara collapsed onto the ground, shaking violently. Her entire body trembled with fear. A moment later, Mara ran back toward her, pretending to panic. "Oh, Clara, I thought it bit you." She grabbed Clara's shoulders, acting relieved. "Thank the heavens you're safe." The other workers nodded in agreement. "Your friend really cares about you," one woman said. Clara smiled weakly. Yes, she does. But inside Mara's chest, anger burned hotter than ever. Even the snake had failed. Clara had escaped again. And the prince? The prince had heard about the incident. When he learned that Clara had nearly been bitten, he personally checked on her later that evening. "You should be careful in those fields," he said gently. Clara bowed her head. "Yes, my prince." But Mara was watching the entire conversation from a distance. And at that moment, she decided she would stop relying on accidents. No more snakes, no more hired boys. The next plan would be perfect. The next plan would destroy Clara forever. And the opportunity arrived only a few days later. The palace servants were given new duties for the morning. That day, the chief housekeeper called two names: Mara, Clara. Both girls stepped forward. "You will clean the king's private chamber today." Some of the other servants glanced at them with quiet envy. Cleaning the king's chamber was considered an honorable task. It meant the palace trusted you. Clara felt slightly nervous but grateful. "Thank you," she said politely. Mara bowed as well, but inside her mind, something dangerous was already forming. The two girls walked through the palace corridor together, carrying cleaning cloths and baskets. When they reached the king's chamber, they pushed the large wooden doors open slowly. The room was beautiful. Tall windows allowed sunlight to pour across the polished floors. Decorated shelves lined the walls. A large wooden desk stood near the window. Everything inside the room looked expensive and carefully arranged. Clara immediately began preparing the cleaning tools.
But Mara's eyes were scanning the room carefully. Then she saw it. On the king's desk rested a beautiful gold wristwatch on the table. The watch glimmered brightly under the sunlight. For a moment, Mara simply stared at it. And in that moment, an idea struck her like lightning. Her heart began beating faster because she suddenly realized something. This could finally destroy Clara completely. She forced herself to remain calm, then she turned to Clara casually. "Clara," she said, Yes, Clara replied while arranging clothes. You should clean the bathroom first. The king usually checks that place carefully. Clara nodded without hesitation. All right. She trusted Mara completely. She carried a bucket of water toward the bathroom connected to the chamber. The moment the bathroom door closed, Mara turned slowly toward the desk. Her eyes locked onto the watch again. Her breathing became slightly heavier. For a second, she listened carefully.
The bathroom door remained closed. Clara was humming quietly while scrubbing the floor. Mara walked toward the desk. Her fingers slowly reached for the watch. She picked it up. The gold surface felt heavy in her hand. For a brief moment, even Mara felt the risk of what she was doing. But then she remembered something. The prince's eyes following Clara, the prince's concern after the snake incident, the prince's gentle voice when he spoke to her. That memory hardened her heart. Without another thought, Mara slipped the watch into her pocket. A moment later, Clara walked back into the room carrying the empty bucket. "Bathroom is done," she said. "Good," Mara replied calmly. "Let's finish the rest." Clara began dusting the shelves while Mara wiped the desk. Neither of them spoke much. Clara never even noticed the watch had been there, and she certainly didn't notice when it disappeared. The trap had already been set. Later that afternoon, while the other servants were busy outside, Mara quietly slipped into the servants' quarters. She opened Clara's wooden chest. Inside were Clara's few belongings: her folded dresses, a cloth purse where she kept money for her family. Mara carefully placed the king's watch beneath the clothes. Then she closed the chest gently. Her lips curled into a satisfied smile. "Now let's see how you escaped this one," she whispered. That evening, the palace suddenly erupted with panic. The king's watch was missing. Guards rushed through the halls. Servants were ordered to gather in the courtyard. Every bag and chest would be searched. Clara stood nervously among the other maids as the guards inspected their belongings. She didn't understand what was happening. When the guard finally opened her chest, the gold watch rolled onto the ground. For a moment, the entire courtyard became silent. Every servant gasped. The guard picked up the watch slowly. "This was found in her chest," he announced loudly. Clara felt the world spin. "What?" she whispered. "That's not mine." But the guard's face was cold. "You stole from the king." Clara shook her head desperately. "No, I didn't. I swear I didn't." But the more she tried to defend herself, the worse it sounded. The guards grabbed her arms. The other servants stepped away from her in fear. Standing behind them, Mara covered her mouth dramatically. "Oh, Clara, how could you do this?" she whispered loudly. Clara stared at her friend in disbelief. "You mean you didn't believe me too?" "I didn't do it," she cried. But no one listened. The guards dragged Clara away toward the palace holding cells. Inside the dark prison room, Clara collapsed onto the cold floor. Her heart pounded painfully. Her mind raced. How did the watch end up in her chest? She tried to remember every moment of the day again and again. Cleaning the king's chamber, Mara asking her to clean the bathroom, coming back to finish the work. After that, nothing unusual had happened. At least, nothing she noticed. But none of it made sense. Clara buried her face in her hands and cried quietly. Outside the prison walls, the palace continued its normal routine. But one person in the palace could not stop thinking about Clara: the prince. The accusation bothered him deeply, day by day. Clara had always been honest, hardworking, kind. Nothing about her behavior matched that of a thief. Yet, the evidence seemed clear. The watch had been found in her chest. Still, something about the situation felt wrong, very wrong. And the prince had decided he would not rest until he understood the truth.
Days later, while walking through the village market near the palace, the prince heard a loud argument behind one of the stalls. A young man's voice sounded angry. "You promised you would pay the rest." The prince slowed his steps. The second voice was quieter, but familiar. "Mara, you already got your money," she whispered harshly. That wasn't the full amount, the boy replied. You said you would pay the balance after the job was done. The prince's eyes narrowed slightly. Job? What job? Mara looked around nervously, unaware the prince was nearby. Lower your voice, she warned. But the boy was already frustrated. We tried to do what you asked, he said angrily, but the hunter showed up and ruined everything. The prince stopped walking. Hunter? Now his curiosity had turned into suspicion. Mara quickly pushed the boy away and walked off, but the prince had already heard enough. That evening, he called one of his most trusted guards. I want you to find that young man from the market, the prince said quietly. Bring him to me, but do it secretly. The guard nodded. By midnight, the boy had been brought into a private room inside the palace. The prince stood before him, calmly. Tell me the truth, the prince said quietly. What job was Mara talking about? At first, the boy hesitated. But when the prince promised protection and showed him a small bag of coins, the boy began to speak. And the moment the story started, everything changed. She paid us, the boy said, to attack a palace maid named Clara. The prince felt his chest tighten. The boy continued. She wanted us to force ourselves on her. The prince's jaw clenched. But we didn't finish, the boy added quickly. A hunter showed up and scared us away. The prince's mind began racing. So the attack had not been random. It had been planned. But the boy wasn't finished yet. There's more, he said nervously. The prince leaned forward. What more? The boy swallowed. She also told us she framed the same girl for stealing the king's watch. The prince froze. What did you say? She said she took the watch herself and hid it in the girl's chest, that what we failed to accomplish, she has accomplished it herself easily, and she won't be giving us any balance again. The room went completely silent. At that moment, the prince knew the truth. Clara had been betrayed, and the person responsible was the one pretending to be her closest friend. The prince did not wait. The next morning, he went directly to the king. After hearing the entire story, the king ordered a public gathering in the village square. By afternoon, the entire village had gathered. People whispered excitedly. Some were curious. Others expected to see Clara punished publicly. Clara was brought from the prison. Her hands were tied. Her face looked pale from days without sleep. The same villagers who had once admired her now looked at her with suspicion. Standing among the crowd was Mara. She pretended to look sad, but deep inside, she felt relief. Finally, Clara's disgrace would be complete. The king stepped forward. Today, he announced loudly, the truth will be revealed. The crowd fell silent. Then the prince signaled to the bards. The young man from the market was brought forward. Mara's confidence suddenly wavered. The boy pointed directly at her. That's the woman who hired us. The crowd gasped. Mara's face turned pale. The prince stepped forward. She paid them to attack Clara, he declared. And when that failed, she stole the king's watch and hid it in Clara's chest. The villagers erupted into shocked whispers. Mara began shaking her head desperately. No, that's a lie. I don't know you. We never met. But the boy spoke again. She promised us money after everything was done. The prince's voice grew cold. We also searched Mara's belongings this morning. He raised a small cloth bag. Inside were coins, payment for the crime. Now the truth stood naked before everyone. The villagers slowly turned toward Mara, the same woman who pretended to defriend Clara, the same woman who cried loudly when Clara was arrested. Clara stood frozen. Her mind struggled to accept what she was hearing. Mara, Mara, she whispered. Tears filled her eyes. You did this to me. Mara tried to speak, but no words came out. Clara's voice trembled. You're my friend, my sister. I trusted you. The crowd grew quiet again. Then something else happened. A messenger stepped forward from the edge of the square. He carried a letter. This arrived from Clara's village yesterday, he said softly. The prince took the letter. After reading it, his expression darkened. He slowly turned toward Clara. There is something you must know. Clara's heart began to pound. The prince hesitated before speaking. Your mother passed away. The words hit Clara like a thunderbolt. Her knees buckled. No, the prince continued gently. She heard that you had been imprisoned for stealing. Clara turned slowly toward Mara. Realization flooded her mind. You went and told her, knowing her delicate health? Mara lowered her head. Clara collapsed onto the ground, sobbing. Her mother had died believing her daughter was a criminal. The pain was unbearable. The entire crowd watched in silence. Even the king looked disturbed. After a moment, he spoke firmly. Mara's crimes are severe: attempted assault, betrayal, and false accusation. He turned to the guards. Take her away. As the guards dragged Mara through the same square where Clara had once been humiliated, the villagers stepped back in disgust. For the first time, Mara understood what real disgrace felt like. Meanwhile, the prince gently helped Clara stand. Your name has been cleared, he said softly. You are free. But Clara's eyes remained full of tears. Freedom could not bring her mother back. The prince placed a hand on her shoulder. You suffered because of someone you trusted, but the truth always finds its way into the light. Clara looked up slowly. The crowd around her was silent now, ashamed of how quickly they had judged her. In a quiet voice, Clara said something the entire village would remember for years. Sometimes the deepest wounds do not come from enemies. They come from the people we call friends. And that day, the village learnt a lesson they would never forget. Jealousy can turn friendship into poison. But no matter how carefully lies are hidden, truth has a way of revealing itself. Eventually. Mara's betrayal was next-level evil. But could you have spotted it sooner? Drop your thoughts below and smash that like button. Share with friends and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories. Thank you.